Hey folks, welcome back to Animal Quest. In this episode, we look at people who tried to get pictures with animals, from a woman who had been warned before but ignored every rule again to a fitness influencer who hiked alone into Russian bear country. But first, a wildlife photographer who traveled across the world for the perfect shot and got trampled by a herd of elephants instead. It was November 23rd, 2019, somewhere in southern India. In a protected forest, corridors stretched across parts of Karnataka and were a refuge to one of the largest populations of elephants in the entire continent of Asia. This region was known among wildlife photographers for producing otherworldly shots, a temptation far too enticing for an aspiring photographer like Lachlan. Lachlan Turner was 27, an Australian freelance wildlife photographer with a knack for rare imagery. Unlike photographers who stuck to predictable shots, he built his following around unusual animals that were difficult to find and even harder to photograph. The rarer the animal, the better. There's a part of me that respects that instinct, wanting to capture something nobody else has. The problem, as we'll see, is that drive has no built-in off switch. When he learned about a small elephant population in a Karnataka reserve that had drawn researchers and photographers alike, he immediately packed his bags and left for India. Lachlan's photography was special. While others focused on backdrop and location, his core focus was the animals themselves. Professional wildlife images generated online buzz and helped generate licensing opportunities. This allowed photographers to establish their reputation as legitimate in a highly competitive field. I'll say this much in his defense: the pressure to get the shot no one else has is real. That doesn't excuse what happened next, but it helps explain it. He joined a guided exploration group inside the reserve and spent much of the day searching for signs of elephant activity. For hours, the search was futile. Only cattle, no wildlife. Eventually, some elephant tracks and fresh vegetation damage turned up, but the elephants themselves were still nowhere to be found. Maybe this was a sign for the better, but Lachlan didn't take it. If I were him, I'd like to think I'd have read the silence as nature telling me to relax. But I understand the itch. Walking away empty-handed after traveling across the world feels unbearable. As the sun set, he grew increasingly erratic, determined to find the animals before dark. Eventually, he heard what he was looking for: movement, deeper inside the forest. This was the opportunity for him to investigate, and he took it. This was the first mistake. In my opinion, this is the exact moment the tragedy becomes inevitable. Not bad luck, but a decision. That distinction matters throughout this whole episode. Wildlife reserves enforce strictness on visitors for a reason. Encounters with large mammals come unwarranted, and the animal kingdom doesn't tame itself for humans. Once Lachlan separated from the group, he also separated himself from the people most capable of getting him out of danger. The sounds led him toward a clearing, where a herd of elephants was feeding among dense vegetation, a sight that, to him, justified the whole treacherous journey. What he saw was a rare photographic opportunity. What he failed to recognize was the danger surrounding it. Lachlan made the false assumption that a calm elephant is the same as a friendly one. Those are not the same thing. I think this is one of the most common and most dangerous misunderstandings people have about wildlife. Calm is not consent. Calm is just calm. Until it isn't. A single animal may appear calm, but every member of the herd is constantly watching the surroundings and ready to react if anything falls apart. Wildlife officials later confirmed that several juvenile animals were moving with the group that day. That detail changes everything, and it's the detail I find most chilling. Herds containing young elephants are often far less willing to tolerate unfamiliar faces, especially if the distance is too close. If Lachlan had known this one fact, he might still be alive. Lachlan began photographing from a distance. The elephants kept feeding, and some shots turned out well. Most photographers would have called it a hit. Lachlan did not. He wanted more. Precision, sharpness, angles, everything had to be perfect. He moved closer, then closer again. The photographs improved, but his appetite to take more shots only rose. One of the most dangerous and life-threatening traps in wildlife photography is the blind faith that the next photograph will be better than the last. I find this fascinating in a dark way. It's the same psychology as gambling. The reward of just one more overrides every warning sign. The problem is that perfection rarely announces where the boundary is. By the time many photographers realize they have crossed it, they are already too close. Lachlan eventually switched from photographing the elephants to photographing himself with them. It was no longer about documenting wildlife. It was about being part of the image. He positioned himself in front of the herd and began taking selfies. For a while, nothing happened, and that was enough to convince him to keep going. People often underestimate this stage of wildlife encounters. It's like waiting for a car crash. Nothing happening does not mean an animal is comfortable. Sometimes it simply means the animal has not yet decided how to respond. This is the most underappreciated point in the whole episode. Silence from an animal isn't approval, it's a pause. Lachlan kept shooting, unaware his surroundings were about to change. Witnesses reported the herd suddenly became alarmed. The exact trigger was never identified, but several elephants shifted direction almost instantaneously, and the movement spread through the herd like wildfire. Once a herd weighing several tons begins moving together, humans have very little ability to alter the outcome. One moment, Lachlan was taking photographs. The next, he was an obstruction in the path of moving elephants. He tried to move clear. There was not enough time. There never is. One elephant struck him and knocked him beneath the moving herd. Several animals passed through the area before he could escape. The incident was not a deliberate attack. That distinction is imperative. I don't think the elephants did anything wrong here. Wildlife officials later recalled that the elephants were not hunting him, targeting him, or attempting to injure him specifically. The danger came from being positioned in the wrong place when several tons of elephants suddenly occupied the same space. By the time reserve staff located him, Lachlan was unconscious with catastrophic chest trauma, pelvic fractures, and severe internal bleeding. He was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Wildlife authorities tightened their rules after this to prevent future photographers from suffering Lachlan's fate. The danger hadn't started when the elephants moved. It started the moment he left the group, the moment he ignored the distance. To me, that's the real lesson here. Tragedies like this rarely happen in a single instant. They happen across dozens of small decisions, any one of which could have broken the chain. The next one didn't just walk right to her death, she built it herself. It was July 19th, 2018. A brutally hot day at a drive-through wildlife park in Florida. Several adult lions had settled near a restricted enclosure, resting in open shade, alert but stationary, attention shifting occasionally toward passing vehicles. Jennifer Reed, 27, a geologist, had entered the facility as part of a guided park visit. She was passionate about geology and had spent time in wildlife regions before. Wilderness was not a warning to her. It was her refuge. This case is the most uncomfortable one because of what came before it. According to prior records, she had a consistent habit of ignoring safety protocols around large animals and had been warned before for crossing restricted zones. Her concerns regarding the reserve's safety were clearly negligent. The wildlife system isn't built for exploration. It's built to observe at a safe distance. As always, the group was briefed beforehand. Stay inside the vehicle. Keep windows closed. Follow the guide's instructions. The guide, an experienced operator, delivered it routinely, assuming visitors were there to follow the rules, not break them. I don't blame him for that assumption. Most people do follow the rules, which is exactly why these incidents feel so jarring. When the vehicle reached the lions, roughly 30 feet from the track, one lioness was awake and sharply tracking movement, calm, collected, calculated. This was predatory focus, the natural instinct of an apex predator sensing unfamiliar movement. The guide reinforced the importance of the park's safety instructions to remain inside the vehicle, and stepping outside could not just be a safety hazard, it could be a critical, life-endangering encounter. Lions in parks and reserves see vehicles as default entities, not prey. The animals are used to vehicles as a single stationary object. The moment that object breaks its expected shape, it's no longer a stationary entity. It becomes a potential hazard, and lions are well equipped to deal with such hazards. When a human body becomes externally visible to apex predators, their demeanor shifts. Once a human comes under the radar of a large predator like a lion, the chances of coming out unscathed become quite slim. This was the moment the lion's pattern changed. Jennifer opened the vehicle door and stepped partially outside to get a selfie. The guide immediately instructed her to return. The instruction wasn't followed, and she moved further out, fully exposed on open ground. I'll be candid, this is the moment that frustrates me most. There's a difference between an honest mistake and a deliberate, repeated choice to ignore a direct warning. This was the latter. This is proof the failure wasn't in the system. It was the breakdown of adherence at the exact moment adherence mattered most. The lioness, until then resting alert, shifted posture, head lowered, shoulders engaged, attention locked onto the figure now standing in the open. This is the typical predatory posture large felines show when a perceived boundary is violated. The distance between the enclosure and the vehicle was approximately 25 feet, a distance that didn't do Jennifer any favors. The lioness covered it in seconds. The lioness made direct contact with Jennifer outside the vehicle. Other passengers began shouting, the guide attempted to intervene, and the lioness clamped onto the side of her head and neck before disengaging as the commotion escalated. Jennifer suffered catastrophic skull fractures and severe cervical spine trauma, and despite emergency treatment was pronounced dead shortly afterward. Reserve investigators later confirmed all procedural safeguards had been correctly implemented. Instructions clear, repeated, aligned with protocol. The determining factor wasn't system failure, but individual deviation at the moment of enforcement. This is one of the cleanest examples of a death the safety system anticipated and tried to prevent, and still couldn't, because a system can only do so much against someone who steps around it. And at this point, the pattern is already established. The next person sought fame. Not just regular fame, but a fame only the likes of Houdini could conjure. And he paid the ultimate price for it. It was August 21st, 2019, near Nanning in southern China. In the bustling city, there lay an abandoned crocodile breeding facility that had slowly fallen to dust and debris after years of neglect. The property had once housed dozens of crocodiles and was the most sought-after commercial breeding place. By 2019, much of the site had fallen into doom and despair. Fences had rusted and buildings had partially collapsed. The eerie facility also had several ponds near the property, filled with murky water and overgrown vegetation. Local rumors suggested a handful of crocodiles had never been recovered when the facility shut down, exactly the kind of place an internet-hungry influencer would be drawn to. Zhang Wei was just 19 and desperately wanted to become famous. He streamed regularly on a popular Chinese platform, mostly gaming streams and reaction videos, but very few people watched, fewer than 100 viewers on average. For someone chasing internet fame, that growth felt miserable, and his hunger for more eventually led to his downfall. And I think this is the most uncomfortable part of the story, not because it's shocking, but because it's relatable. Almost anyone who's tried to build an online presence knows that sinking feeling of low numbers. The tragedy isn't that Zhang wanted attention, it's what he was willing to do to get it. Over time, Zhang noticed a pattern. The videos that gained traction were never the funny or genuine ones. They involved abandoned buildings, dangerous dares, trespassing, imminent risk. The more reckless the content became, the more fame it accumulated. This is where many creators slip without realizing the danger. They stop asking whether something is safe and start asking whether it will get attention. By the time Zhang noticed this, urban exploration and dangerous dares had become his primary content. Entering abandoned structures and accepting tough dares became routine, each stunt moving him a little closer to mega fame, one of the most chronic forms of overconfidence, the kind built through surviving previous mistakes and not learning from them. It's a pattern across every case in this episode. Survival breeds confidence, confidence breeds repetition, and repetition eventually meets an animal that doesn't cooperate. On the evening of August 14th, Zhang announced a live stream at the abandoned crocodile facility, remote, isolated, unsettling enough to generate curiosity. As the sun set, he entered the property broadcasting live. For the first hour, everything was mundane, exploring the facility, messing with old equipment, doing dares from the chat. Then he found something unexpected. Near one of the facility's old ponds, Zhang noticed what appeared to be a large crocodile resting beside the water. The animal was completely motionless. It showed no visible reaction to his presence, no movement, no repositioning, nothing. Many viewers assumed it was a prop. Others suggested it was dead. Zhang wasn't sure what to believe. What's important to understand about crocodiles is that stillness isn't unusual. Large crocodiles remain motionless for long periods while regulating body temperature. To an observer, that stillness can look like a prop or even something deceased. Neither assumption is safe. The crocodile had done nothing, just lying there as usual when Zhang approached. It wasn't at fault. It hadn't approached him or displayed aggression. The problem was the environment that had formed around the encounter. Thousands of people watching, eager for Zhang to do something dangerous. The chat filling with dares and bets. Get closer, touch it, throw something at it, take a selfie. The dares only got weirder from there. And this is the part that genuinely disturbs me. Every person typing a dare in that chat was doing so from somewhere completely safe. None of them would feel the consequences. Only Zhang would. And yet their voices were the very thing pushing him forward. The audience experiences none of the risk. Only the streamer does. The viewers are sitting safely at home. The person standing next to the crocodile is not. Initially he hesitated, and for a moment common sense seemed to be winning. But the donations and comments kept coming, and the pressure was on. Eventually, a challenge involving a selfie received overwhelming support from the audience. Zhang reluctantly agreed. From that moment, the encounter stopped being about curiosity. It became a performance, judged by thousands. If there's a villain in this story, it isn't Zhang or the crocodile. It's the faceless crowd egging him on from total safety. He picked up a long stick and tapped it lightly over the crocodile's head. Still no movement, confirmation to Zhang that it was safe to move closer. What he failed to recognize was that wildlife doesn't become safe simply because it remains still. Absence of movement is not absence of danger. He positioned himself near the animal to take a photograph, and the chat kept pushing him closer. He did. Then closer again, all for attention, wanting the clip to go viral. He crouched near the crocodile and turned toward his camera. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the crocodile suddenly lunged, not because it had been pretending to be dead, but because Zhang had entered striking distance. Crocodiles are ambush predators, and the closer a potential threat gets, the less distance they need to cover. By the time the crocodile crocodile moved, Zhang had almost no chance to react. It seized his arm and dragged him into the pond. Witnesses saw only a brief struggle before the phone disappeared beneath the surface and the stream disconnected seconds later. His body was recovered that evening. Wildlife officials later used the incident as an example of how easily people misinterpret crocodile behavior. The crocodile was guided purely by instinct. The danger was visible from the start, never hidden. The viewers encouraged it, Zhang accepted it, and one decision after another carried him closer until there was no distance left to protect him. The next case involves a man who was never afraid of animals. In fact, it was the opposite. He believed animals should be afraid of him. Years of practice boosted his ego, until one day this overconfidence led to something sinister. A lone leopard resting quietly, a rapid urge to photograph it, and one wrong move. That's all it took for things to go south. It was September 2, 2016, in Namibia's Etosha region, where vast open grasslands and scattered acacia trees attract some of Africa's most iconic wildlife. During the dry season, visibility can stretch for hundreds of yards, making it one of the continent's most popular destinations for wildlife photographers and safari enthusiasts. Ethan Perry, 30 years old, was a travel blogger from the United Kingdom who had built much of his online identity around close encounters with wildlife. He wasn't interested in ordinary photographs. Anyone could photograph an animal from a safe distance. Ethan wanted something a bit more eccentric, something that sparked gossip. The more dangerous the situation appeared, the more valuable the pictures became. Over the years, he had developed a reputation for pushing boundaries during animal encounters. A reputation like that doesn't form overnight. It forms because dangerous behavior got rewarded with attention instead of consequences. And I think that's the key to understanding Ethan. He wasn't born reckless. He was trained into it, click by click, view by view. Every time a dangerous encounter posted well, and the numbers went up. Friends described him as someone who treated safety guidelines as suggestions, believing any animal could be tamed. He forgot that nature can never tame itself. That belief followed him to Namibia, where it would cost him everything. On the third day of a wilderness excursion through Etosha, the group was crossing an open grassland corridor when the guide noticed movement near a tree. A leopard resting in the shade, neither hunting nor moving, simply avoiding the burning sun. For the other passengers, the sighting was already exceptional. Leopards are among the most elusive predators on the continent, and finding one resting in open shade is a sighting most visitors never get. The guide stopped the vehicle so everyone could observe and photograph it, and most of the group was satisfied. Ethan was not. He did what he always did, pushed into the personal space of a wild animal, even though the leopard was simply resting in the heat of the day. The guide's instructions were simple: stay seated, take photographs, don't approach. Ethan kept shooting, and the images turned out well, but he began complaining about the angle, then the distance, then the quality. Eventually, he decided the vehicle was limiting him. Against the guide's instructions, he stepped onto the ground. Several passengers objected. The guide ordered him back, but Ethan began walking toward the leopard, slowly at first, then more confidently. A staircase of smaller decisions, each one feeling justified by the last. The leopard lifted its head. It was now fully aware of him. The leopard rose to its feet, posture noticeably more alert. Ethan was now the sole focus of this lone leopard. The guide again instructed him to return immediately. Ethan continued forward. He came within a distance investigators later estimated at less than 20 feet, not photography, but entering the animal's personal space. Its body remained tense, a warning, not an invitation. Ethan interpreted the lack of aggression as tolerance. They are not the same thing. I think this is the single most important lesson across every case in this episode. An animal that hasn't attacked you yet is not an animal that has accepted you. It is an animal that is still deciding. He turned his camera around and began positioning himself for a selfie. The leopard was now directly behind him. In a split second, the leopard suddenly charged. The animal collided with him and knocked him off balance. He fell heavily onto the ground. His camera was thrown several feet away. The leopard bit repeatedly at his upper torso and neck. By the time guides drove the animal away, he had suffered catastrophic injuries to the throat and major blood vessels, and died before emergency transport could reach advanced medical care. Wildlife officials later reviewed the incident. The attack was simply the final consequence. When someone spends an entire afternoon crossing boundaries, eventually there are no boundaries left to protect them. The next case is different from the ones before it. This one did not happen in a wildlife reserve. There was no safari vehicle, no open terrain, no guide standing nearby with a radio. It happened behind a fence on private property, and it began with someone who had spent so much time around dangerous animals that he'd forgotten what dangerous actually meant. This might be the saddest case for me, because unlike the others, there was no crowd driving him forward, no algorithm rewarding him. It was entirely self-inflicted, fueled by familiarity rather than fame. It was March 9th, 2022, at a licensed private exotic animal facility in rural Texas. A keeper had recently acquired 3 chimpanzees. Jason Graham, 48 years old, had spent most of his adult life working around animals. Over the years, he cared for reptiles, parrots, exotic mammals, and various species that most people would never dream of keeping near their homes. His property resembled a zoo, and he enjoyed being known as the person who could handle animals others avoided. Confidence that had begun crossing into overconfidence. The chimpanzees had arrived only days before the incident, and Jason was fascinated by them immediately. Chimpanzees are among our closest living relatives, and their intelligence and human-like expressions often create a false sense of familiarity. People see human-like behaviors and begin believing the animals think like humans. They do not. This is one of the most important lessons in this episode, and it applies far beyond chimpanzees. Recognizing a behavior doesn't mean understanding the motivation behind it. One moment, a chimpanzee appears calm. Moments later, it can turn sharply aggressive. Jason knew their behavior was unpredictable, but still became obsessed with documenting them. Photographs, videos, wanting everyone to see his pets. He forgot that, much like humans, chimpanzees value personal space. From a distance, everything seemed fine, and he interpreted that as friendliness, a dangerous assumption. 2 days after bringing them home, Jason wanted a photograph with them. Taking a picture of an animal usually means respecting its space. Taking a selfie means entering that space yourself. Jason entered the enclosure carrying his phone. Initially, he stayed several yards away. The chimpanzees paid little attention to him. It should have ended there, but he moved closer. And this is how many wildlife incidents begin. Not with one mistake, but with a series of smaller decisions that slowly remove every layer of safety. The chimpanzee closest to Jason began watching him carefully, posture stiffening, attention fixed on him. Jason interpreted this as curiosity rather than a warning sign and kept approaching, eventually crouching down for a selfie, placing himself directly within striking range. Without warning, it lunged. The chimpanzees overwhelmed Jason within seconds. Witnesses described screaming that continued far longer than anyone anticipated, followed by silence. All three attacked in turns, biting and tearing in the sustained, relentless way that makes chimpanzee attacks so devastating. By the time responders reached him, he'd suffered severe facial trauma, deep bite wounds, and blood loss too severe to survive. He was still conscious when found, but did not survive to reach surgery. Like other cases in this video, it began when someone repeatedly ignored the boundaries the animal was trying to establish. And by the time Jason realized that, he was already close enough to get killed. What I keep thinking back to with this case is the timeline. He had owned these animals for 48 hours. That is not enough time to understand a chimpanzee, and yet it was all the time it took for familiarity to completely overpower caution. This last case involves another clout-chasing influencer who thought he could rub shoulders with a predator everyone is scared of, a brown bear, one of the most powerful land predators in the northern hemisphere, capable of covering ground faster than most people can react. But that didn't stop him. He wanted to take a picture and assert his dominance. But what happened to him afterwards became a cautionary tale for everyone. It was September 16th, 2017, in a remote forested region of eastern Russia. As bears entered a period of intensive feeding before winter, sightings across the region had grown increasingly frequent. Dmitry Ivanov, 31, had built a modest social media following through his fitness journey, regularly posting videos of himself far too comfortable around wild animals. And unfortunately, that's a mindset that tends to work perfectly, right up until the moment it doesn't. That single line sums up every case in this episode. On that morning, Dmitry set out alone on a hiking trip through a remote section of forest. No guide, no companion, already a serious risk during peak feeding season, with or without a camera. I want to point this out because it gets overlooked. Before the bear ever appeared, before the phone even came out, Dmitry had already made a decision that put him in danger. He wasn't thinking about what could go wrong. He was thinking about the content. The hike proceeded normally for hours until he noticed movement off the trail, a large brown bear feeding near a fallen tree, roughly 30 yards away, unaware of him. It was simply existing in its own environment. Dmitry pulled out his phone and recorded several videos from the trail. That would have been enough, but Dmitry kept going. As the bear continued feeding without reacting, something shifted in him. It was no longer enough to film from a distance. He wanted a selfie, one photograph close enough to prove he had stood beside a wild brown bear and walked away from it. He stepped off the trail. Every yard he gained made the situation more dangerous, but the bear kept feeding, and Dmitry interpreted that as permission, one of the most common mistakes people make around wildlife. Then the bear noticed him. Attention locked on immediately, and the atmosphere changed. The bear rose onto its hind legs, huffing, ears rotated backward, a clear warning. And unfortunately, Dmitri waited far too long to recognize that. His foot caught an exposed root, and he fell heavily onto one knee, a terrible moment to stumble. The bear reacted immediately, closing the remaining distance almost instantly when Dmitri stumbled. The attack lasted less than a minute, but caused devastating trauma to his chest, neck, and head. Rescue teams later located him using his emergency beacon, but he succumbed to his injuries before reaching definitive medical care. Wildlife officials investigated and identified the bear as a healthy animal with no history of aggression. No action was taken against it. The bear hadn't gone looking for Dmitri, hadn't entered the town, hadn't wandered into anyone's backyard. The entire encounter happened inside the bear's environment, and it simply reacted when a person ignored its warnings and kept approaching.